Welcome to the Love Examined playlist. We're solving love one song at a time. Welcome back to the Love Examined playlist podcast. Avrum.
Hi, Ellie.
I was saying when this song that we're going to talk about today first came out, this song has a lot of memories for me of like a particular time in my life. You chose the song, but I remember listening to this song. I was traveling a lot at that time. I think I was living in England, I was in Germany, I was here with dancing. But to me, this song has such longing underneath it, and such a sense of searching for some idea of home. And you're not quite sure. You keep trying to find it in different places, but it doesn't always like pan out. And so this song always reminds me of that sort of period of my life where I was really struggling to try to understand love and relationships. Look, we're all struggling to understand love and relationships all the time, but at that particular time, this song hit a chord for me. So I remember sitting, listening to this song and feeling very like, seen, heard, and understood. Why did you pick it?
Oh my God, where to begin with this song?
First of all, it's gorgeous.
The song is just beautiful. It's a beautiful song. By the way, for those who don't know, we are the song is Sheryl Crow's Home. Not one of her better known hits,
right,
but probably, in my humble opinion, one of her best songs.
Agreed.
Probably one of my top 20 all-time favorite songs. I mean, this is just one of these songs from the music and the pedal steel guitar that just does this beautiful sort of ambient country thing, and the lyrics. But from a bird's eye view, like you, this song touched me in a different way. I don't know where this comes from. You know how, Ellie, there's certain things in your life you're drawn to, and it's clearly something from childhood. So maybe something your parents had a longing for that gets through osmosis. I've always had a thing for small towns, like little tiny towns. Kind of like the
little pink houses.
I swear, Ellie, I was just going to say John Cougar. I was just going to say John Cougar songs. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And Americana, like that's that small town Americana.
But also the Tragically Hip and some of their early songs about Canadiana. And, when I've traveled across Canada by car a couple of times, I've always just picked a random highway exit to get off of and go to a small town and speak to people. And there was one time, Ellie, in my life when I sold everything in Montreal and drove up to Vancouver, and I stopped at a small, tiny little town in, I don't know, Manitoba. And for just a brief moment, I thought I could unpack my car, get a job as a busboy, and just lose and just completely become anonymous and not that. Anyways, so I've always had a pull to this. And so the song touches on, and I don't think it's a cliche. I've heard this before for clients of mine who grew up in small towns who've left, for example, and they'll say, my friends all finished high school. They all got married by the time they were 21 to the people they grew up with in high school, had kids, live a block away from their parents. Like the song clearly touches on Sheryl Crow's background, which she grew up in a small little town somewhere. I forget where she grew up, but she grew up in a small little town. Right. And so there's just something about this song that is heartbreaking and warm at the same time. And this is what I love about the song. Ellie, some of the songs we pick, they sort of pick a side. It's either fantastical love and passion and, and longing, or dreary and depressing and,
it's like, it's usually like the beginning or the end.
Yeah, the beginning or the end. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. The beginning or the end. This song is one of these rare songs, and I don't know, maybe you can think of a couple of others, because I was having a tough time thinking of any.
Right.
It's sort of the most realistic portrayal of sort of all the fantasy and longing that goes into the beginning of a relationship. But I think that it does she does in the lyrics a really good accounting of the John Kabat-Zinn calls it the full catastrophe of living in his book on mindfulness, the full catastrophe of living in in a monogamous relationship. I think she captures it. She captures the longing, she captures the boredom, she captures that moment where your fantasy gives way to reality and you wake
Mm-hmm.
up to your life one day going, oh, so,
Wait a
so
minute.
that's who I married,
Right.
right? And really, not only that's who I married, but if people handle their relationships well, it's, oh, this is who I am,
Right. Which is the
right?
more poignant question
For sure.
that
Yeah,
holds
yeah.
so many keys.
You know,
Yeah.
and then she touches on questions, really important questions of, well, now what do I do?
Mm.
Now what do I do? Anyways, let's get into it
Okay.
because, oh my God, I can go through every single one of these. It's
I'm
one of these rare
very
songs,
excited to hear your notes. Let's do this.
you know. Well, let me ask you, when you were reading the lyrics for this song, was there any point in the song where you thought, yeah, there's nothing, I have nothing to discuss on this?
No, the whole song is fascinating. It's such a journey, and it's such an interior view into a person's, like you said, the sliding away of all the facades and suddenly going, where, like, who am I? Where am I? How did I get here? Is this where I want to be? All of those questions that can potentially change the path of your life. So it's a beautiful view inside.
Now, I have to share this one thing. I've shared, we talked about this, I think, in our WhatsApp chat a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
One of the beautiful things about YouTube is that you can go onto YouTube and sometimes people who are in the original video will comment saying, oh, by the way, I'm at the 2-minute mark. And so there's a scene in the video where there is a young couple, very much like
Right.
the young couple she's talking about. And in the
Right.
video, they're kissing. And the woman in the video comments on the YouTube saying, that was me at the age of 17.
Yeah, I saw that. That was so cool. Yeah,
And
so
what
interesting.
was interesting is she's now probably, I don't know, 50s, maybe,
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
And she said that Sheryl Crow was so cool and all this. And she got married to the guy, but then they got divorced. And she goes, the song actually
Mm,
became her life. Like she
right.
really lived that way. Small town, got married young. It didn't work out. And it was very, very cool. Okay, let's get into this. So right from the get-go, Sheryl Crow, it's kind of like she's like, I'm going to hit you over the head with the
Hmm.
first stanza. I woke up this morning and now I understand what it means to give your life to just one man. I just, what can you say about that? This idea of the dawning of a realization that I picked you,
Hmm.
and unlike cereal or laundry detergent,
Hmm.
you're not going back to the store too quick
Right.
to return this. So it's like I have to make a reckoning with this thing. I'm just kind of curious to hear you because first I should say, this is very clearly a woman talking and picking a man. When you read that line, did
Hmm.
anything come up for you? I have my notes, but I'm a man reading it as a man about a woman picking a man. I'm just wondering, did anything come up for you just with that line?
I look, I think it's so layered. It's so layered with the depth of choosing a person, the it seems laced with both um, love and disappointment, right? It seems kind of those two things are sort of entwined in that statement, that it means the heaviness of it and the responsibility of it, and also like, is this a choice that I still stand behind?
Right. Yeah, when I was thinking about this, it's that old Chris Rock joke. Something about, some people say life is short. No, it ain't, especially if you pick the wrong person to marry.
Oi.
Anyways, it's such a good line. So here's a couple of things that I jotted down here about this idea. Uh, so what does it mean? You know, you understand, that you're married. And what are the things that we understand now that we didn't know before we were married? And the truth is, you only can understand this by getting involved in a long-term relationship. You can't read about this in books. You only can live into this experience. And the first thing is, and a lot of young couples have to go through this, and it's very challenging, is this sort of acclimatizing to moods, internal and external, where you're sharing your psychic space and your physical space. And it can be everything from air conditioning, right? I like
Right.
it cool, you like it hotter.
Mm.
to sharing of space, to sharing of individual time versus togetherness time, all of those sort of acclimatizing to two people trying to adjust to each other,
Yeah.
sort of lends itself to, that, you wake up to your life one day and now you understand what it really means to give yourself to someone else. It's not all flowers. It's not all tragedy, mind you, but it is this adjusting to the push and pull that we've talked about before of the togetherness forces and the separateness forces of wanting to be one's own person. And it's really hard to navigate that tension.
Yeah, because I think what I hear in this line also is the places where she gave herself up for that. It wasn't just that she gave herself to just one man, it was that she gave herself up in order to have that in certain places. And now the reckoning is near.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think I've said this before to couples or in workshops, and I think it comes off a little negative, but I just think it's realistic. I think a mourning has to happen for a lot of people when we get married. And I'm using marriage loosely. I mean, committed to one person.
Right.
And
In a relationship.
it's a mourning of all the choices that are now no longer available to us. It's a mourning of the fantasy that will at some point give way to reality. It's a mourning of the longing that would come with the possibilities when you're single, and that you never know, something very new and bright and shiny can come around.
Right.
And if people who don't understand that a mourning process has to happen, that you have to shed some old skin, they will fight this tooth and nail going forward. What's wrong with this relationship that is not giving me the things that I had when I was single? And I think
Right.
that's faulty thinking. And so a couple of other things that I thought about, the idea of giving yourself over to someone, and the dawning of that would be how something, it's just something that everyone will have to reckon with. When you're dating, your partner's parents are their parents, and they might be nice to you, Mr. and Mrs. Cohen, nice to meet you, but they mean nothing to me right now.
Right.
And they really don't have an emotional, financial, cognitive influence on my life to a degree. Something changes, and it changes for all of us when we marry and they become your in-laws. It just changes, and it happens in every marriage. And I think that adjustment also of, this idea of what it means to give your life to just one person. Well, it's not just that one person. When you give
You're
your life to one person,
inheriting all the stuff that comes with that person, including all the people.
you better damn well believe you're going to be inheriting all that kind of stuff, and of course, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Maybe, a different song we'll talk about in-law relationships, but it is going to be a challenging balance about how much of this is my stuff, how much of this is your stuff, and how much of this is our stuff. And it's tricky. It's tricky to figure all that kind of stuff out. And so I think I'm just going to pause there because there's so many juicy lines. I don't want to spend too much time, but that was sort of some thoughts I had about this idea of giving yourself for just one man. So I'd like to hand it over to you. Where would you go? Because I think every line in this song is just beautiful. I want you to choose something, take us there, Ellie, and then we'll go from there.
I just think the concept of home is a really important idea if you're about to build a relationship with somebody, and then once you're in a relationship with somebody, because you can use the word home, but that is a word like love. It means a different thing to every single person who's ever experienced it. And so many of those experiences are based on what you grew up in, the homes you've lived in before, after that. And but we sort of throw it around loosely. And I think that she's talking about this idea of home that isn't just an external building of a house, but it's the feeling of home that you have within yourself. And how do you even share that with another person? How do you build that with another person? Is there a way to create that and not lose your own home? So that's where that for me is one of the beautiful parts of this song, is that home means so many things here.
Yeah. And I think that's, I've worked with very wealthy clients, and I've worked with clients who have no money, are poor, or struggle financially. And this is what's fun about my job, is that I get to hear how people define home in very different ways.
Yeah.
The comforts of what when she says home here, I think if you grew up in a
Mm.
small town, she goes, oh, and this is home. There's melancholy in it, right? I think
Mhm.
the song clearly is melancholy when she
Yeah.
says it, but there's also comfort in that, right? And so what I take away from that course, at least in terms of sort of wisdom about this, is how do you navigate your own trajectory to your own home so that you and your partner create something anew, right?
Mhm.
But you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So,
Right.
and I get a sense in the song, which she's touching on, I've heard this from other people who grew up in small towns, is that it's kind of like you shrug your shoulders and, we're never going to leave the holler.
Mhm.
I moved 3 trailers over or something, but
Right.
this is it. I think there's something in the middle. What Ellie, something you and I have talked about before in this podcast about bringing emotional maturity and growing beyond the family of origins that we come from. And so I think the way that one does that is the real struggle about borrowing what worked, reworking what didn't,
Right.
and then creating something anew with someone. Too often, I think what you get is the opposite, which is a total rejection of everything that I grew up with, and I'm going to
Mhm.
do it completely differently and
Right.
create home anew. Or there's nothing, there's nothing I can do about it. Like this is just what it is. I don't have any options.
Yeah, and I also think so, people today, of course I'm speaking generally, but they don't enter into relationships with a clear vision of the home they'd like to create together. They sort of jump in, bring whatever they came from, cobble it together over a period of time, but they don't necessarily like imagine together like is what our would like our home to look like. And that's where I think it goes to explicit and implicit expectations that we've talked about before. I mean, I certainly will see that maybe more, say, in the religious community. There's a certain understanding of what the home will look like, what the values are, what the week will look like. The day-to-day life will have these elements. Um, but I do think that most people don't talk about vision. And if you're not talking about vision, then you don't know how to get to where you want to go, or you could be going to two totally different places and have no idea until you suddenly realize you neither of you have arrived.
I have to say, at least the couples that I work with, I think that there is quite a bit of discussion. Again, maybe I work with a certain client base where they meet and they talk about what area would you like to live in and this and that. I mean, we live in a very psychobabbly kind of society. So
Mhm.
I find couples are quite introspective in my office about that. But so much of this is fantasy and
Mhm.
expectations of what my parents want. I think you have to live into this.
Right.
I think that this is why you've heard me give this spiel about the symptom is a solution, or the gift of a symptom.
Okay,
It's the
say more of that about that.
so you're for example, boredom. No one likes the feeling of boredom. Boredom is a very discomforting, sort of itchy sort of feeling.
Hmm.
And if you marry, or if you end up in a long-term relationship, boredom is going to be part and parcel of what happens here. And there's a lot of reasons why, but it's just going to happen. And it's a symptom that can serve you in terms of, is there vitality and adventure that is missing in this
Hmm.
relationship right now? And it's time to think anew about this thing, whether it's sexually, financially, spiritually. Is this boredom serving? Anxiety is another one. Yes, you can take Ativan, and yes, you can sit there and meditate and try to rise above it. But I have to say, I think there are states of emotional distress that are there to serve us as a wake up call to
Yeah.
say, there is something amiss.
Right.
There's something amiss, and this is good energy, granted discomforting energy,
Right.
good energy to get off your hiney and do
Hmm.
something about this.
Hmm.
So those are my thoughts. Okay, I got to go into another. I got
Okay,
to choose
go.
that. I got to choose another lyric. Okay, okay. So, wow, such a good line. Such a good line. This house is full of lies. Afraid of feeling nothing. No bees or butterflies. My head is full of voices, and my house is full of lies. Now, I'd like to believe she just didn't do that to rhyme, because it does rhyme. But what a
It
line.
doesn't matter. It's stunning. Yeah.
My head is full of voices and my house is full of lies. So when I was doing this, thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking, like, what lies could you be talking about? And then I thought, no, Ellie said, don't get caught up in what her lies were. Let's just take it at
Right.
face value, you know? So then I was thinking, well, that's interesting. What are the lies we tell ourselves to get by every single day? Every
Mm.
day. The lies that we tell ourselves to accommodate, the lies that we tell ourselves
Right.
to bite our tongue on things that, you know, and I was just thinking about,
Like,
you
oh,
know,
I'm really okay with that. We're good. Everything's
right.
fine. Right.
And the where I went with this is something again, you mentioned it before, is, you know, the implicit promises that we don't reveal to our partners
Right.
because we're concerned about their reaction. By implicit promises, I mean the dreams and the hopes and the wishes that our partners are going to take care of us in some fundamental way when we first meet.
Mhm.
We don't reveal those things because we're embarrassed or ashamed about those things.
Mm.
I've used this example all the time. If you grow up poor, you marry someone who you think has money or will make money at some point. You
Right.
don't say that out loud, that you're going to take care of me financially. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
It's an implicit promise that you will take care of me for the rest of my life.
Right.
And that will get violated at some point, possibly, likely. And then you have to deal with the aftershocks of that. But I was thinking about that, and I've been playing with that sort of in my head in terms of, you know, what are the little lies that I tell myself
Mm.
every day to get by? I'm sure the list is substantial. I haven't given it that much thought, but does anything come to mind for you in terms of that line about, you know, my head is full of voices and my house is full of lies?
Yeah, I look, I think sometimes, like you said, lies get a bad rap in terms of being seen as a cause rather than a symptom, and that the lies that we tell ourselves can also be tremendous arrows pointing to the place that needs the most attention. Um, and so I think those moments where, sometimes lying and saying I'm fine is speaking to a deep need for having things to be okay. And if you really understand that and really give yourself a chance to feel the depth of that need, you maybe can then start to create it for real. But if you sort of because that's where I think sometimes the challenge is like, oh, I'm just lying to myself, and then we just dismiss all of the lies. No, the lies, I think, point to things that are important to us that aren't being addressed. And if we just approach those lies as bad, then we miss all of the incredible information and nourishment that's in there somewhere.
Yeah, it reminds me of my clients who talk about guilt.
Right.
And they want to get rid of it because it's such a discomforting feeling. I'll often say, well, you know, guilt probably has something to do that's unfinished in your family of origin. It
Mm.
came from somewhere.
Right.
Might serve you to sort of explore what that is. Every one of my clients who do, they first of all, they can locate it. Doesn't take much time,
Hmm.
and then you shine light on it, and it just doesn't have the same hold on you anymore. You never get rid of it, and that's the thing, right? We never get rid of these things.
Right.
Okay, Ellie, I'm going to serve up my last. I mean, again, I can go through this every stanza, but this is for me. This is it. This is where she hits it out of the
Kicker.
park.
All
The
right, go.
bases are loaded, Crow's up at bat, and she hits a home run.
Amazing.
Okay, unbelievable. I'm going crazy a little every day, and everything I wanted is now driving me away. I woke up this morning to the sound of breaking hearts. Mine is full of questions and is tearing yours apart, tearing yours apart, and it's tearing yours apart. It's tearing yours apart, and it's tearing us apart. Ah, just beautiful. Anybody who's been sitting there at 3 a.m.
Right.
on your knees with your partner crying, trying to, you know, you're both sitting there
Trying to pick up the
trying to
pieces.
make sense of how painful this is. You don't know if you should leave. You don't know if you should stay. I'm impacting your feelings. You're impacting my feelings. It's like a swirl of, and I just love how she plays with the words. It's tearing, you know, that she sees in her partner what she's doing to him, something about her longing for something else. And he's like, but but I want to be with you. But my fantasy, and like, so she's driving him crazy. And then she just ends it with that boom, and it's tearing us apart. That I'm tearing us apart, that I am doing something here that is ripping us apart. And it's so tragic, but it seems to me so indicative of the very real thing that happens in love relationships, and it happens with children too, but it's different. But there is something that's so tragic and painful sometimes with our kids, where my reaction is going to impact you, your reaction is going to impact me, and that combination is going to do a number on both of us. It's just
Right.
so beautiful. And
So how do we navigate that? Because there's like, I generally with my clients say, like, there's the work before, the work during, then the work after.
mhm.
So, but what she's describing is like, what's the work in that moment when things are literally falling apart? Um, how do you go? Where, how do you generally work with your clients to help them navigate that moment where things are being torn apart?
I almost don't want to shine light on this, because sometimes it's just best to leave things alone. Just it's so poetic and beautiful. But look, if someone, when I'm working in my office and people are this ramped up emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
the first part of any work as a family systems therapist is to lower anxiety so people can think. We can't think when we're that
Right.
emotionally distraught. So when
Right.
people are in my office and there's lots of tears, the first thing I always do when someone cries, generally, I mean, some people are just naturally criers. So those, I'll say, where would you like to begin? And they start crying. So
Right.
it's not indicative of anything except that that's the way that they react. But when someone starts to cry, I always pause the session and say, what just happened now that brought up some of that emotion? And
Mm-hmm.
we spend a minute just trying to understand where that emotion, the source, is coming from. Just to bring some sort of regulation to the session.
Right.
Um, but if I find that there's some sort of reciprocal thing happening with a couple that I'm working with, where they're both doing something and they're using this session, um, where they're impacting each other in this ping pong sort of a way, the emotion, I I I will try to slow things down. Sometimes I'll even ask one person to, well, when I saw people in person, to sit in the waiting room, to
Right.
dial down there, bring them in one at a time. I will work sometimes with a couple, one week, one the next week, just to bring things down, because you can't get anywhere if everything is so raw and everything
Right.
I say is ripping you apart.
But
I think,
but how do you give them the tools to navigate that, like when they're not in your office and they're in the house together, right?
yeah,
Like, because it's one thing to navigate it in your office, it's another thing then to send that couple home knowing that things are dialed up, to 15 out of 10, and now they have to live in the house together. So
yeah.
how do you support that situation? What do you give them that will help them navigate that in a way that won't necessarily tear the whole thing down?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've talked about this before. I have an article that I have saved, that I have shared with many couples, and almost, I can't think of anyone that hasn't found this helpful. And
Mm,
it's the Dr. John Gottman research about heart rate and
right.
emotional flooding.
Yeah.
And so, um, it's not about avoiding these things, because life gets very complicated and messy at times, and we don't always have the luxury to do this. But when we can get a hold of ourselves and we understand how reciprocity works, that
Mhm.
if I start screaming at you or saying a horrible thing, it's going to impact you, and if you get defensive, you're going to do the same to me, and then something takes over, and
Mhm.
it's very hard to pull yourself away from that. John Gottman's research suggests that when couples, and parents and children, it's not just couples, it's parents and
Right.
children too. I got to tell you, Ellie, I notice this with my kids. Like, if I don't get myself out of certain situations, I just get so ramped up, and so do they. It's really hard at that point, and things get very heated.
Mhm.
What Gottman says is you have to find a biofeedback meter. He uses heart rate, but I think that's just one metric. There's others you can
Right.
use.
Right. You can
Where you're
follow,
trying to,
where are your shoulders, or how is your breath, or, there's so many different ways to sort of monitor your state.
right. And so how is your emotions flooding over your thinking
Mm,
that's going to lead you into that sort of reptilian fight or flight thing, where
right.
where this is where nasty things can happen. This is where good this is where solid, bright, well-thinking, not abusing substances couples can hit each other, for example. And they'll say to me, I've never hit anyone before.
Right.
Right? How did I hit my spouse? Or,
Yeah.
People will say things to each other that are designed to be cruel. It's
Right.
not like, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, I meant that to hurt you in some way,
Right.
because what you're doing to me has just crossed some sort of a line.
Mm.
I'm a realist, Ellie. I deal with real people. So the idea that we're going to prevent any of this, I just think is ridiculous. I think depending on the families we come from and our level of emotional maturity, the less emotional maturity I have, the less wherewithal you have to not engage in these things. If you
Right.
if you grew up in a family where your parents were very hot, and like things got really out of control, it's really hard, right, to do something very different, but you can get better at it. And that's why John Gottman's research is so important. So the idea generally is, in something like this, if it's 3 a.m. and your partner wants to talk about divorce, okay, and you're like, look, we've done this for 3 nights in a row. I'm operating on 3 hours sleep. So one of the two has to say, time out.
Right.
I'm going to walk away from this conversation. We're not making, and it's not a we, it's I'm not making any decision about buying the house, selling the house, having a child, not having a child, having an abortion, not having an abortion, getting divorced, staying together. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff right now.
Right.
We're pulling the kid out of public school, pulling him into private, no big decisions. I'm going to go walk around the block. Maybe I'm going to go stay with my mom and my dad for a night, get a hold of my head, and let's try to sit down and do this again. Now, whenever you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I personally think it's situations like this where a coach, a therapist, clergy, someone that you feel is wise and that you can work with is helpful, because it's very hard sometimes for two people to do this themselves.
Yeah.
If you can't, great. I know I need a mediator or a coach sometimes to regulate my own sort of moods and emotions. And so that's the other thing I tell people is that it might be a worthwhile investment to seek out counsel, to think through these times. And Sheryl Crow, when she's talking about here, is not every day. It's clearly she ends this song where things have been building and they're building and they're building and they're building. And my fantasy of whatever is getting in the way of you being at home with me, and I hate myself and you. And at that point, I don't know if two people really can navigate that without some outside help. So that's sort of my, now I have to say, I'm going to end this with this one thing and then we'll hand it to you and we'll say adios. It's almost like we should end the podcast because this is the best song in the world.
Forever and ever.
But it's almost like, and still, Ellie, and still, there's something so beautiful about and so real about these lines that even though I just gave you all this kind of stuff, there is something so human about 3 a.m, both two people at their wits' end, trying to make sense of how I'm impacting you and you're impacting me, and I don't want to lose you, and what am I going to be if you leave, and so you're holding on to you and stop holding on to me. And there's just something that Sheryl touches on here that is just wonderful, and I think that it will be part of it'll just be part of any long-term emotional commitment. I don't think you can get yourself out of it, and I think that's why those lines hit me so hard. But yeah.
But I think what you said also about having someone to unpack it with, I think the frequency and intensity can be mitigated by how much work you do before, during, and after, and how much benefit you can get from when things do fall apart can certainly be supported by having a person to unpack things with, like you said, whether it's a friend or a coach or a rabbi or a therapist, because sometimes having things fall apart is a good thing if you can unpack what happened. But I think a lot of the time we think, like you said, oh, things are just falling apart and that's it, I'm out. So I agree with you. The ability to, the humanity is still there, even if you're doing the work that allows you to be able to take those situations and make them good, like turn the bitter to the sweet. But yeah, I think that's the work. Avrum, good song. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
I was on mute. Sorry, guys. I'm back.
I wondered why you were so quiet there. It's like, wow, he's really pondering. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. This is the Love Examined Playlist podcast. If you want to hear the songs that we talk about, please check us out on Spotify, Apple Music for the Love Examined actual playlist. And if you have a topic, song, anything you think we should talk about, please drop us a line. You can find us in the liner notes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. See you next week.